There are divergent views about the effectiveness and extent to which South Africa's agricultural policies have been implemented. Data from the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development show that domestic agricultural output in 2022/2023 was twice as much as in 1993/1994. 30 years into democracy, we look at whether South Africa's agricultural sector has performed with Stellenbosch University agricultural expert Wandile Sihlobo, and he joins us via our video link. Wandile, thank you so much for joining us this evening here in SABC News. I mean, one would say that looking at those statistics and 30 years on, and of course the agricultural output in South Africa has increased, one would say that this is good news for the sector, right?
Yes, Mali. I think overall the sector has done reasonably well. I mean, you just made the point now, more than doubled if you look at the output in 1994 compared to today. And I think what's even more heartwarming when you look at those figures is that the progress in the sector has actually occurred across all of the subsectors of agriculture. That is your field crops where you have maize, sugar, soybeans and everything. And in horticulture, which is mainly the fruits and vegetables, and also within the livestock and poultry industry, there's been some good progress over the years. And of course, then you may ask the question to say, what has been underpinning this progress in South Africa's agricultural sector? And I think to my mind, there are about 2 or 3 aspects that have been behind that. The first one being the aggressive push to open up the export markets for South African products, done by both the government and the private sector. And the second aspect is the investment that the South African private sector has put onto new seeds, new genetics. All of that has really boosted the productivity on the sector. And I would close it off to say the broader technological use in the sector then, as well as the farmer skills and the farm worker skills improvement, all of that have been some of the key ingredients to catalyze this progress that we've seen over the past 30 years.
But of course, as we talk about progress in the agricultural sector, one would most importantly ask, and this is the question that always comes to the fore when it comes to farming in this country, if whether this sector has managed to transform over the past 30 years.
I think, Bali, as South Africans, we have to first really appreciate the fact that improvement in our agricultural sector is an important part. That export points that I was talking about allows us a year to enjoy export earnings of over $12 billion a year. That's significant money coming into South Africa. The second aspect is that on food security, we are a country that is food secure at a national level, but of course then we do have all of the challenges at a household level. But I do think that having that availability of food as a country, where we are exporting now about half of what we produce and still have a lot for ourselves, is a second point that we must enjoy, as well as the employment that has been created. But again, then to your central point to say, yes, those are positive statistics, we can all celebrate as South Africans, but the transformation part is one that I would say over time, we haven't really progressed much as South Africa. In my latest book, A Country of Two Agricultures, one of the figures that we detailed there is that Black farmers in South Africa still make up about 11% of the overall agricultural output that we're talking about at a commercial level. But then one has to ask the question to say, what has slowed the transformation? And I think there is the aspect of both the government and the private sector that one could delve into.
And of course, I was coming to that. Where does it seem as if we are lacking to increase the number? Because I know a number of Black South Africans seem to be actually quite interested looking into farming as a career. And one would also ask, how do we make it more inclusive? I know that you speak a lot about government will at the same time, but, you know, taking it a bit more further, how do we make it inclusive?
I think, Mbali, of course, this is a complex question, but I think the starting point also would have to be on the land reform question that we all talk about over time. And the typical point that one always have to start on is usually the one where to say, okay, Are we transferring a lot of land or not? Which is on its own, it's an important question to dive into. But I think the starting point, given the challenges that face South Africa today, is to look at saying how much land has the South African government acquired over time up until today, and has it transferred that land to Black South Africans? In our numbers, we think that the South African government, under what is called the PLUS program, the Proactive Land Acquisition Strategy, is sitting with around about 2.5 million hectares, which I think should be transferred with some form of a long-term lease or title deeds to Black beneficiaries. Those beneficiaries also have to be selected in a careful way than perhaps we have done in the past, so that it's people that can utilize that land for what it's for. If it's for agriculture, they have to have the skills for that. If it's for industrial, there has to be the skill set for that. If they don't have the skills, there has to be incubation programs to assist them on that. And in discussion with the leadership at the Department of Agriculture, I do think that they are moving towards that one route. So that's the other part. The other aspect then, of course, it has to do around agricultural finance that we typically don't talk about, and various aspects and the intervention that needs to be made there, either blended finance or whatever, to assist the colleagues that are coming into the sector so that they can be able to make it commercially viable. Because Mbali, we are struggling in South Africa with three broad problems. We have a challenge of higher unemployment, we have poverty issues, and of course we have low growth. And I think that if we are making land reform, while it answers to the question of restorative justice, it also has to answer to the economic question that many South Africans struggle with. So I think that will be the starting point. And beyond that, then we can explore then other methods of accelerating land reform, transferring more land to Black South African, which again, in a country of two agricultures, and a book called Finding Common Ground, we detail some of the methods where we think those could be explored.
And Wandile, one would also ask, when we speak about, the farming sector, why is the agricultural sector so important to South Africa and actually getting it right? I mean, we also spoke about the issues around transformation and land reform, but why should we get it right in this country?
I think that perhaps many people do not think about this a lot, and you look at the usual numbers that Stats SA puts out, where they would say agriculture makes up about 2.5% of the South African economy or GDP, and people take that as an absolute figure. But if you look at the backward and the forward linkages of this sector, you can take that number to just under 10% when you include the value chain. So the first part is that this is an important sector of the South African economy. And I do think we have to also appreciate that we have just over 1.3 million South Africans that are working both in primary agriculture and in the value chain of the sector. We have just around about 950,000 people in primary agriculture, and the remainder, which is just over 400,000 people, are working within the value chain. So there are those economic interests that are in there. But I do think that also, given the political economy and the historical conditions of South Africa that we are all aware of as a country, this is one of those sectors that still struggles with that friction, the question of transformation. But most importantly, this is a sector that also has a significant touch and an impact in the rural economy in South Africa. I don't know how many of your listeners actually drive around and see rural South Africa outside of the urban areas. Small towns are dying in South Africa, and one of the industries that can actually bring a bit of life in these towns is agriculture, agro-processing, and perhaps some of the mining activities. So we do need to get this sector working at a commercial level and making sure that people are absorbed in this sector. And these rural towns that are dying, also facing heavy economic pressures and unemployment levels, this is the sector that can actually absorb. And lastly, I do think that we have to have appreciation of the fact that many South Africans did not have a pleasure of actually going to school, acquire high levels of education, to be absorbed in skilled sectors. And agriculture still does offer the opportunities to absorb people that are not even heavily high skilled, and those people can upskill once they are in those jobs, which is why when we talk about land reform, some of us get criticized by saying, let's push for commercialization rather than only on small plots, because one end, it has to be creating employment within the sector. And I think it's vital all South Africans should look into the sector.
Wandile, thank you so much for your time this evening. That is Wandile Sihlobo. He is a Stellenbosch University agricultural economist.